What would be the probability to get crystallizations continuously from noble devils? He was certain that it was extremely rare. Truly 0.10s of a millionth of a probability. It was still theoretically possible, but from a common-sense point of view, it was hard to think it would occur. However, in reality, it did occur, and another crystallization was in Muyang's hand. It was an additional effect created after the achievement effect, Devil Hunter, became an A rank. It was to take away the title from the noble devil opponent after killing. Even if Muyang didn't kill them himself, if Muyang's undead killed them, it seemed like the same effect was placed. I'll take it. There was no reason to reject it. Soon a gray haze appeared around Muyang. An evil tendency stat. Muyang grinned. Either way, he was far from light. And after a bit later, the surroundings became loud. Yuhaha. Devils, don't even think about coming back here. We give this victory to The Dakibis became excited. With Seo Han at the front, they were tasting victory with their weapons raised. It was so. Victory. They had suppressed all the devil soldiers and won. The losses were big, but currently the sweetness of their victory was much greater. However, not everyone was tasting the sweetness of their victory. The expression of the fire tars, especially Ogre, didn't seem to get brighter even though they had won. They just stood and prayed quietly in front of their great chieftain with their fists clenched. The great chieftain has died. It seemed like in the end he didn't survive after being hit by Bastro's final blow. It was enough to make even the great ogre be silent. Muyang didn't meet with the great chieftain that many times, but he also didn't really know what sorrows were to lose someone special. And so he couldn't align with Ogre's sadness. It was impossible for him to empathize. However, Ogre was the closest person to Muyang among the people who were alive in the underworld. So Muyang made a proposal. I have the power to bring back people who are dead. To undead, you mean? Ogre reacted. As Muyang affirmed, Ogre shivered his body. Muyang, I hope you're joking. Even the great chieftain and even all the fire tars that died at this place wouldn't want to live as undead. He was totally serious. If Muyang wasn't the one who spoke of this, then he felt like Ogre would have thrown a spear right away to kill him. Sadness. Muyang looked towards one side and saw the king mutant chewing on a devil soldier. The king mutant's main material was assassins. The assassins of the Forest of Death raised by Wang Chonglin. In the past they were Muyang's colleagues. That's why they were revived as Avengers. However, amongst them there wasn't any kind of sadness or sentimentality. If they were really that close, there would truly be feelings of wanting to revive them, even if that means turning them into undead. However, Muyang took a step back. He knew that his common sense and his ideas weren't normal. How could they be normal if he lived 40 years as a puppet, staying in the middle of the living and the dead? It would be hard, but this also would be a stepping stone in my development. So he needed to develop his disjointed sense of balance. If he could just balance them, he would become closer to becoming the absolute. Afterwards, a message popped up explaining that the battle had ended. Muyang just concentrated at the message. Impossible achievement. It was an achievement he received for when they found it impossible for Muyang to achieve in his current state. And it was difficult for Muyang to achieve to fight against 6 noble devils, including a duke. It would be the same even if he had the help of the great chieftain and the fire tars. Did the situation get overturned a few times even during battle? Maybe because the achievement was that difficult, but unlike the last time, the Star of 12 Zodiacs gave him 2 gifts. Muyang nodded his head and looked at the 2 things that appeared from mid-air. Name: Helmet of Taurus. Rank: A+++. Classification: Equipable type. Endurance: 100,000. Effect: one of the 12 zodiac stars. A helmet placed on Aries. Asterisk magic resistance plus 100. Asterisk Taurus's good-naturedness, symbol of wealth. The rate of growth for the user's territory greatly increases. Asterisk able to quickly rush. When you collect 3 out of the 12 zodiac stars, all stats plus 30. When you collect 6 out of the 12 zodiac stars, it ignores skills below a rank. When you collect 12 out of the 12 zodiac stars, achievement effect, King of 12 zodiacs. The first one, the Helmet of Taurus. It was the second set equipment after the Belt of Aries. On top, the Helmet of Taurus was a territory equipment. Normally, this type of equipment that gave a good advantage to the own territory was used by the leaders of guilds or clans, and it was rare. Very good. Since it would take a long time to recover from the damages received from this battle. This territory equipment was something that could reduce that time greatly. Next he looked at the cape. Name, Cape of Gemini. Rank, A+++. Classification, equipable type. Endurance 80,000. Effect, one of the 12 zodiac stars. A cape placed on Gemini. Asterisk agility +50. Asterisk 2 antibodies, immunity against poison and disease. Asterisk 2's development. Choose one and greatly increase his developmental speed. When you collect 3 out of the 12 zodiac stars, all stats +30. When you collect 6 out of the 12 zodiac stars, it ignores skills below a rank. When you collect 12 out of the 12 zodiac stars, achievement effect, King of 12 zodiacs. Immunity to poison and disease. It was the perfect equipment to prepare for a curse. With this, he was able to receive an additional effect as the 3 of the set equipment were added. Even if he had lost the effect of Lunatic Sovereign's set, it was a much better effect. He lost 1 and earned 2. Now all that's left is... Muyang looked at the crystallization he held in his hand. The devil's strength gathered in one and became a crystallization. If it was Duke Bastro's crystallization, the strength which Muyang had seen, it was great enough for anyone to desire it. Before he had a taste of victory, he first gulped the crystal. Brr. At the same time he shivered his whole body. His veins bulged across his whole body. His body rose into the air. Kaya act. Then from Muyang's side a black book appeared. It was the item earned from the underground arena. The item the mid-level devil was desperately looking for. The book that needed the strength of a top-level devil to lift the spell was reacting to Muyang. Afterwards. Asterisk. A huge temple. A woman was afloat in the middle of a lake. The woman who wore a fluttering white dress showed extreme beauty that made everything else in the world dull. Anyone in the world would fall in love with her at first sight. She had the looks to even embrace gods, but for some reason she showed hurriedness in her face. The extinction of Bafura, the one who was with us in our goals, was confirmed. Around the lake millions of devils were thrashing. It was the same for the 26 demon kings. Are you speaking of the 60th seat, Bafura? Oh my goodness. Are you saying that the war party is being active even though the red moon is going on? A demon god had become extinct. This was something that could never be ignored. On top, if it was Bafura, he was the one who was leading the peace party with her, Gremory. The plan to destroy every living being besides devils in the underworld. Additionally, to flip and crush a planet's principle of causality. The peace and war parties had sharp conflicts of opinions on this matter. And although Bafura wasn't a combative demon god, he still was a demon god. The strength of a demon god couldn't be simply calculated generically. However, his extinction was certain. Gremory's eyes finally shook. We need to hurry. If we stay like this for any longer, the barrier of this temple could instantly collapse. There is a need to combine our strength. What if we join forces with the neutral party? As long as Dantalion is with them, we cannot have that happen. That genius of lies. If we work with someone who we don't know what they will do behind our backs, our work might be greatly spoiled. 26 demon kings agreed at the same time. Dantalion. The genius of lies. The neutral party was with him. He was the most dangerous one who they could never join forces with. Gremory bit her lips as she continued to speak. We need to correct the collapsed fissure. For the peace party to gain strength, this is the only way. Would that be possible? The agreeing party wouldn't leave us be, and if we aren't careful, the location will be found out. I need you guys to exert your powers. We need to gather the fragments of the fissure. Gremory interrupted a demon king's words and spoke. The crossroad of a decision. Before the red moon ends, they were planning to move and act first. Currently, all of the war party members were scattered. Normally, the demon gods had their own designated territories and were unable to leave their area. Besides one Baal, the first seat demon god. Basically, they were able to exhibit their godly powers so long as they were in their designated territory. To exhibit their powers outside of their designated territory, another step was needed, which was to turn on the fissure and to connect it to the area outside. However, Baal had shaken this fissure and made it chaotic. The fissures that connected to the peace party were twisted and they couldn't help but fight on their own. To fix this fissure, they needed the fragments of the fissure. And the fragments could only be found outside of their territory. It was definitely possible for others to instantly find the Demon King's locations once they left this territory, but they had no other way. To gather the strength, we need to take risks. The peace party was currently cornered. If they were gathered in one place, the story would be different, but since they were all scattered, they really had no choice in this situation. If they were to fight on their own, they would lose or be absorbed by other demon gods. If Baal didn't stand in their way, it would have been worth a fight. Unfit for a demon god, for the dignity of the first seat, Baal messed around with them. Gremory knitted her brow. At the same time, a huge goat's horn appeared. The horn was the symbol of Gremory's power and a type of search device. It was a search device that could sense danger in the surrounding and could read the nature of all things. It was to open the gate at the safest place. But as the horns sprouted, Gremory's expression became more serious. "Who are you? Who are you?" A soft voice tickled Muyang's ear. Even if it was just a simple sound, it had the peculiar power to attract the opposite sex. If he was even a bit careless, he felt like he would be bewitched by the sound. And now Muyang was just listening in a dark space. A mental world. The black space was Muyang's mind. In other words, this conversation was akin to telepathy. But he couldn't be helped but be surprised when he thought how he came to be in this mental world. The Call of the Devil. Was it a book that allowed you to contact a particular devil? Gremory. Soon Muyang realized who he was connected to. A message popped up which definitely said, "You have connected to Gremory, the 56-seat demon god who lead 26 Demon King legions." It was unlikely for there to be another being who could sway his rationality just with their voice. Also, Muyang also had an inextricable relationship with her. The qualifications to become the Demon King of the 27th Legion and the weapon Anguish were both related to Gremory. However, he never thought that he could get in contact with her at this moment. "I'm Muyang. Are you really Gremory?" He couldn't help but ask. Even though his voice was firm, internally Muyang was taken aback. He was just checking his rewards after the fight ended, when all of a sudden, a connection with Gremory had occurred. After a moment of silence, Gremory replied, "You're right. But it's strange. I can't see it, but I can feel my blessings on you." It was an obvious thing. From the moment he discovered the Star of David from the Blue Temple, Muyang's path was decided to a certain degree. And the owner of the Star of David was Gremory. There was nothing weird if Gremory had felt her blessings on Muyang. Swoosh. Muyang took out Anguish. Then the sword cried more loudly and announced its presence on its own. "It seems like it's because I have the qualifications of the Demon King to lead the 27th Legion." "The 27th Legion?" "Ah." Gremory's surprised voice filled the air. She was a demon god and it was very easy to distinguish the truth. Rip. Soon the sword ripped the area. While producing the sound of a leather ripping, few hands popped out. Gremory's mental world had pierced through and into Muyang's. Although they weren't meeting each other face to face and were very far away from each other, the mental landscape was influenced just by the exchange of a few words. "I can't avoid it." However, it was fast. Soon, numerous hands wrapped around Muyang. Crush. But none of the hands were able to touch Muyang. A barrier of light was raised and it warded off numerous hands. Boing! The armful's cradle spirit hopped madly on top of Muyang's head. Although its outer appearance was a mere lump of light, it was still an ancient spirit. Even if it was just born, it was a great existence that could influence the disordered terror. He wasn't sure why it was with him at this place, but it seemed like he could exhibit his true strength in his mental world. What are you doing? A prehistoric spirit. You have made a contract with it. I'm sorry, but I need to be certain. If you really are the person I was waiting for. In Gremory's voice he could feel her desperation. And Muyang was surprised. For a demon god to apologize. Never in his life had he heard it before. The demon gods who invaded humanity were all pure evil and they invaded without a word. Only ruins were left in the places where they passed. Apology? He hadn't heard anything similar to that. But how could he not be surprised when the 56-seat demon god personally apologized? Of course, even if it was so, it was true that she suddenly invaded his mental world. He couldn't help but feel unpleasant. If you truly are the demon king of the 27th Legion, I request that you won't reject my touch. Muyang pondered. Muyang thought about what the reason might be for a demon god like Gremory to request from him as if she was in need. If she wanted to, didn't she just needed to act? Muyang looked at the numerous hands that hung around on the other side of the light barrier. They said she was the only female demon god, but it seems like she is an aberration. There were stories that Gremory was the only woman out of the 72 demon gods and had a friendly attitude towards humans. Although they said her beauty was so great that it could bewitch all the gods, by seeing how she expressed those many hands as her touch, this also seemed to be an exaggeration. Either way, even if Armful's cradle was stopping her, if Gremory exhibited her true strength, it would not have any chance of stopping her. If it is a process he has to undergo then. Due to the Demon King of the 27th Legion skill, it was a process he had to undergo at least once. Didn't someone say, the sooner it happens the better? Boing, boing. Muyang calmed the Armful's cradle that was still angry on top of his head. As he placed his hand and roughly pet it, the guy that was hopping around madly slowly calmed down. It seemed like the meaning had still gone across even if he didn't say it. Swoosh. Soon, numerous hands wrapped around Muyang. The feeling wasn't all that great, but the touch was really soft. Although it just passed by, it was enough to sway his mind. If she was able to influence Muyang this much, it was obvious how others would react without even looking at them. Enchanting. But Gremory isn't human. In Muyang's head, Gremory already had an appearance which was far from human. As he recalled she was a monster with numerous hands, he was able to escape a bit from being enchanted. A moment later, as if the confirmation process had ended, her hands moved back. You truly are someone with my blessing. Did you think it was a lie? Honestly, yes. But since I have confirmed you were not lying, please excuse my discourtesy. The demon gods are evil. It was the truth everyone agreed on. They were born from evil and were incarnations that were raised by eating evil. However, the feeling Gremory gave off was definitely different. You are an odd demon god. I'm just hiding my evil. In reality, I'm more vile than anyone else. But the thing I'm going to talk about is much more important than that. It seemed like she had something to say. Muyang quietly listened. Then Gremory continued to talk. Do you know of the items called fragments of the fissure? I have heard of it. In the past, it was an item that the demon gods used to invade. He still clearly remembered when a fissure was suddenly created in the sky and the great city and the blue temple were attacked. The item used back then was the fragments of the fissure. Please find the fragments of the fissure. Anguish, which you are holding, will show you the way. Anguish. Yes, and if it's within this space, no matter how far apart you are able to send me the fragments. If you bring me the 3 fragments, I will acknowledge you as my demon king. I will even give you the authority myself. Her voice became quiet. Even the hands in front of him returned to their original location. And as if Gremory realized it, she quickly spoke. "We don't have time. If you are planning to protect humanity, please help me. We can't let Ball follow through with his plans." That. Soon silence followed. Like a blackout, it was a sudden occurrence. However, he had heard everything he needed. It seems like the situation isn't all that good. He thought about Gremory's words and painted a picture of the situation. If the Demon King legions under her command acted, they should be able to find whatever they were looking for. However, she started her search by requesting Muyang's help, a person she met for the first time. From a common-sense point of view, it wasn't logical. It meant that Gremory was forced into a corner. My predictions were right. The demon gods were fighting over the fragments. Muyang was certain. The demon gods were currently unable to easily leave their territory due to their own reasons. Two factions or perhaps more were divided and in conflict. This fight would last for a few years from now, and within those few years, a conclusion will be made. And Gremory's faction would be defeated. That would be the reason for the great calamity to occur. This was the golden opportunity. By entering their crowd, he could stall for time or eliminate his opponents. And to do this, it was a must for him to find this fragment of the fissure. He couldn't let Gremory's party be easily defeated. Muyang was the only existence who could change this past. Boing. Boing. Muyang gently tickled Armful's cradle. Gremory called it a prehistoric spirit, not simply an ancient spirit. At the same time, she was surprised and changed her attitude towards Muyang. Thanks to this, they were able to progress the conversation smoothly. Not just that, but Gremory knew right away that Muyang was human. Even though she knew he was human, she had acknowledged that he had the qualifications to become a demon king. It was the hardest obstacle, but he overcame it well. I need to keep going without stopping. Since he had overcome the obstacle, now it was time to run. He was pressed for time. He now had about 9 years at most. Within that time, he needed to change the demon god's game or break it. Why? Not long soon after, with the sound of wind, Muyang returned to reality as his mental world closed. Gremory opened her eyes, which had been closed. Her deer-like beautiful eyelids slightly shook as they went up. Numerous devils were watching this scene. That was right. They were just watching her. No one was allowed to touch her, it was a taboo. Facing those who absorbed the fragments. It would definitely be a brutal trial. From what she had confirmed, Muyang's skills weren't at a level she was pleased with. However, Gremory had hopes for what Muyang held on to. She wasn't exactly sure who those beings were, but she felt a few who were in a level similar to Demon Kings or even higher than Demon Kings. Meaning she could say he had infinite potential to develop. Muyang, the one I blessed. I wish good luck for your future. Gremory wished sincerely. However, it was nothing but a voiceless echo. Numerous people pray to a god and wish for them to be answered, but who could gods wish to and want from? The hearts of all of the devils in her surrounding pumped as they watched her woeful figure. That she was someone they must protect. Tens of millions of devils were ready to protect Gremory with their lives. As she was that much of a noble and beautiful being. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The battle was a complete victory. But in its aftermath, numerous corpses were left. I will allow you to bury them near the pum tree. Ogre spoke. It was a privilege to be buried near a pum tree which only true warriors could earn. He meant that he was going to grant everyone who participated in this battle that privilege. The great chieftain was buried first, followed by the rest. Muyang, what is a king? Late evening. As they watched the moon up in the sky, Ogre suddenly spoke to Muyang. Muyang didn't reply. Then Ogre continued to talk. As if he was making a promise to himself. I'm going to make a fire tar kingdom. The great chieftain taught me to always look at a much wider world. You would be able to do it. Ogre definitely had the qualities. The question of what a king is could be thought over when he became one. Ogre stared at Muyang. And then talked. Would you share the cup of brother with me? The cup of brother. It was something he never thought about. However, there was nothing bad in befriending Ogre. Ogre laughed out loud as Muyang nodded his head. Haha. Good. From now on, Muyang, you and I will be in a much stronger relationship than blood. In general, brothers need to help each other. Even if our positions change, this relationship will not be swayed. Was it because the great chieftain who Ogre thought was closer than his blood ties had died? He was more emotional than usual. Ogre clenched his fist. Afterwards, he opened a lid of a bottle of liquor and squeezed out blood as if he was squeezing a lemon. Myung also did the same. From now on, we are brothers. After exchanging the bottle of liquor, they drank it at once. Then Ogre smacked his lips as if it wasn't enough to fulfill him. It was because even if it was a bottle of liquor, it was not much compared to Ogre's size. Myung grinned. A new relationship. Brothers. It didn't sound bad. The red moon was still dominating the sky, vibrant like blood. And it even felt like it gave off the scent. Myung reconstructed the castle with the help of the dwarves and waited for more devils. We were lucky. In the case of Bastro, he could say they were lucky. Because Bastro didn't attack Myung abruptly, he had enough time to prepare. However, he couldn't continuously be lucky. Soul's Tale. Myung accomplished a big development as he got rid of Bastro. He earned a few skills and even had a steep increase in his stats themselves. 1 or 2 high-level devils wouldn't be able to win against Myung. And Bastro's authority, which was similar to replicating. He was now able to imitate it. The Soul's Tale created a clone that was the same as Myung. He wasn't able to make and control 6 clones like Bastro, but the clone had about half of Myung's strength. With AB rank, there isn't a chance. Or is there something that I'm lacking? He inwardly shook his head. Then he reviewed the explanation for the skill. Name, Soul's Tale. Rank, B. Effect, it creates a clone exactly like the user. Depending on the condition of the clone, the user's strength can be placed. Asterisk, only one clone can be summoned. Asterisk, it imitates 63% of the user. Asterisk, the duration is proportionate depending on the user's intelligence and wisdom, currently 7,850 seconds. When it reaches S rank, the Soul's Tale evolves to Soul's Rehabilitation. The special condition to exhibit abilities isn't met. S rank and a special condition. Both were a long way off. Currently, a rank, Swordmaster, was the highest rank among the skills Myung had. As he couldn't say that the difference between A and S was really only 1 level, it probably would have been faster for Myung to find out what the special condition was. You are such a crossbreed. There are quite a lot of different smells coming from you. A knight rank devil mocked him. After Bastro had died, about every 7 days, one devil like this would wander in from the surrounding. Most were lower than a high rank devil, but sometimes like this, a baronet or a baron noble devil would roam around on his own. Myung visited those sort of devils one by one and tried to hunt them. That's why you look tastier. It's like you changed your body to become a great dish for us. The devil smacked his lips. It seemed like he was telling himself that a mixed breed was tastier than a pure breed. Ping. Sharp nails popped out as the devil pushed from the ground. But Myung left the fight to his clone while he crossed his arms. From head to toe, the clone was wearing the same equipment, but the total of all those performances was only 63% of Myung. It's not a usual skill. It was even able to imitate S rank equipment at only B rank. Although there was a difference in performance and duration, it still was amazing. It was similar to a miracle that could come true if it was a main skill offered by a secret class. It meant that it was the authority that went beyond the norm. Hoo-hoo. You are hiding around like a mouse. Wait for me. My teeth will soon be nailed to your neck. The baronet. He seemed to be lacking in intelligence, maybe because he was a devil classified as a knight. However, his movements were exceptional. The clone which held Anguish was slowly being pushed back. However, it didn't easily get pushed back either. It was because even if it was only 63%, it was similar to Myung before he fought with Bastro. While controlling his clone, he turned on his status viewer. Title dash. Darkness and Abyss. All stats plus 10. Achievement effect dash. There are 9 achievement effects. Class effect dash. Death Lord, Lord class, Ruler of Death. King Slayer, Lord class, Slayer of Kings. Sets dash. Strength 372, 229 plus 143. Agility 393, 215 plus 178. Stamina 350, 191 plus 159. Intelligence 357, 223 plus 134. Wisdom 328, 224 plus 2104. Fighting Aura 291, 152 plus 139. Magic Resistance 429, 90 plus 339. Spirit Ability 259, 120 plus 139. Evil Tendency 389, 300 plus 89. Total level 355. Special note: Fighting Aura has been awakened. Completed the 3rd metamorphosis. You have accomplished 3 flowers condensing onto the head and 5 chi and have realized purity. Before and after comparison. Strength 305, Agility 242, Stamina 276, Intelligence 266, Wisdom 247. Fighting Aura 291, Magic Resistance 300, Spirit Ability 200. Dash. Strength 372, Agility 393, Stamina 350, Intelligence 357, Wisdom 328. Fighting Aura 291, Magic Resistance 429, Spirit Ability 259, Evil Tendency 389. Although there were small changes with the title, there was a great difference regarding the stats part, which could even be called revolutionary. Among them, Agility and Magic Resistance showed the most changes. Even if he had lost agility by summoning Sword 1, as if the misfortune turned into a blessing, he gained much more in agility stats. The one that gave the most influence in this was the equipment of the 12 zodiac stars. Also, total level part caught his attention. He remembered people saying how if you surpass a certain standard you could check your level. The total by adding the pure stats and the supporting stats. A top rank monster's standard was around 300. If it was 355 among the 5 levels of top rank, it could be around the 2nd level. This was enough to fight against the Hell Horse and the evil spirit predator Taken. Even if he wasn't in the top 10 humans, current Muyang was strong enough to be within the top 100 humans. Truly, it meant that he was caught up to around the halfway mark towards becoming a top 10 human. Considering how he reached this level within just 1 year, it was an unbelievably insane speed. If he was to enter any group, he would have a role as an influential figure. He also would not be lacking to act as a leader of a group above a mid-size. Being among the top 100 meant that he had that much destructive power. Of course, he was talking about it just simply by looking at the figures. If he read grains and used acceleration, Muyang was able to exhibit a strength greater than that. And a total level of 500 was considered as the standard for transcendental beings, and even Dark Dragon Barca was far lacking when put to that standard. At most, Barca was around the 3.5 level of top rank. Either way, Muyang ceased his idle thoughts. It didn't seem like there was a change to the clone. A clone's possibility for growth. First, it wasn't by fighting. He already fought a few times using his clone. But the clone's condition didn't change at all. With just this mere clone, it would only allow you to kill time. It seems like there is another special condition that affected its development. I'm going to stop playing around. Kaiha. Be terror-stricken. Come to think of it, Bastro's clones all had slight differences. Just by thinking of ripping off your intestines, I feel extremely happy. You're loud. It was in the blink of an eye. In no time, Muyang approached very close to the devil and delivered a kick. The devil, who flew with a pop sound, rolled on the ground. A while after he flew, the devil was able to barely become conscious. Blink. The devil made a dumbfounded expression. It was because he didn't sense Muyang approaching at all. Before he knew it, 3 horns crowned Muyang's head. It was so. He didn't simply have an inner change. His 2 horns increased to 3 and he was able to manage his slowed world much better. By achieving the 3rd metamorphosis, his speed had also increased. The speed was now 8 times. Instead, the duration decreased to 30 seconds. But he was able to run 8 times slower with close to 400 agility. It wasn't possible to simply calculate, but at the very least, you could say he was able to be close to or exceed a transcendental being for 30 seconds. Not just that, but he also had devil wings. Was it due to the influence of the evil tendency stat? Now he was in an ambiguous form that was weird to call it a duckheebe or a devil. There was no way for the Baronet devil to react. There was nothing weird for him to mistake it for blink, the magic to instantly move short distances. There is a slight burden. Once again he moved closer to the devil as he murmured to himself. While he became faster, his body was unable to endure it. I need to raise my stamina more. Stamina was deeply related to the body's endurance. In his current situation, if he used it for any longer than 30 seconds, his whole body would be torn into pieces. Bang dash. Once again the devil rolled on the ground. He could have ended in one shot, but he did it to learn a bit more about the limits of his body. Cough. As the devil got up, he spat blood and spoke as he was confused. I don't see any signs of you using magic. But as if he wasn't a knight for no reason, he quickly pulled himself together and gathered both of his hands. From his hand, blue poison started to spread. It was a fog of poison. The ground melted and the surrounding air was instantly contaminated. It was truly worth being called a deadly poison. Even if you use a strange move, it's useless. This poison fog melts everything it touches. If you misuse blink, you could fall straight into the poison. Bong. Myung stretched out a fist with all his strength. Even though that was all, the air violently bounced out. A wind like a typhoon blew and it blew away the fog of poison. Although he had immunity against poison thanks to the effects of the Cape of Gemini, he did it because his vision was disturbed. The devil widened his eyes. This is nonsense. Are you saying you are a demon king level? But I didn't hear that there was a demon king like you. Zatzik. The devil froze. The devil's whole body instantly became frozen. Myung twisted the devil's neck with his hand, the clear difference in power evident in the resultant snap. Ting. Roll. Afterwards, a green crystal was dropped in the middle of the fluttering ashes of the devil. Myung gulped the crystal without hesitation. As he ate more crystallizations, the lower grade ones had much lower effect in increasing stats. However, it was still better than nothing. Myung shrugged his shoulders and unsummoned his clone. I need to find a different condition. There should be something else that is hidden in regards to Soul's Tale. Didn't he almost see the final result of Duke Bastro's authority? Myung had no plans of giving that up. However, he had other things to do. Before then, I will fight against the Hell Horse. It was almost time. The Hell Horse roamed around the lake. Beside him, a unicorn elegantly raised her face. It was originally the unicorn managed by Duke Bastro. However, Unicorn's mind was being manipulated by Bastro, and when Bastro died, it instantly returned to its original elegance. Then the Hell Horse clung to her as if he waited for this moment. Niai. The Hell Horse spread its wings wide and showed off its strength. However, the unicorn didn't even look at him. The two had a completely different tendency, and as a side effect of mind manipulation, she raised her guard against everything related to devils. Nevertheless, the reason why she couldn't leave was because she didn't recover all her strength. Because the Hell Horse knew that she was going to leave once she was nearly recovered, he was even more desperate. Niai. The Hell Horse was under Kingslayer for all his life. Of course, there was no way for him to have a mate. He didn't know when an opportunity like this would come by. He raised his voice powerfully and rubbed his body or secretly wagged his tail. In Wuhi's eyes, he's just making a fool of himself. Then unwelcoming visitors approached from the side. And Fairy Wuhi, you're making a fool out of yourself. Myung supported her. Then the unicorn beside them became afraid. It was because she saw how Bastro died with her own 2 eyes. Also, Muyang gave off a strong evil scent. The hell horse came between them. He acted to try and protect the unicorn, but Muyang just sneered at his actions. The hell horse was still coercive, but Muyang didn't think the hell horse had this sort of side to him. I will use my last favor. After a fight, the one who loses will obey the other. That is my last favor. The hell horse raised all of his furs. This guy? He looked at Muyang with the sort of feeling that it was ridiculous. It was a sign of acceptance. As if he was going to show off as much of his dashing figure in front of the unicorn, the hell horse took a step forward. Muyang lightly warmed up. The fight with the hell horse had been expected from the beginning. Since he was a present given to Muyang by Kingslayer and the one who didn't like being a present, the hell horse. So the hell horse declared that he would only grant Muyang 3 wishes. By judging him, he would keep any promise he makes. It was Muyang's part to stop him from making another move. To make him obey, this was the only way. The hell horse blew from his mouth. As if the meaning of this fight is to only show off to the unicorn, his movements were extremely light. Carelessness or arrogance. The hell horse didn't know well of what was deeply at stake in this fight. Since he didn't know that even Wuhi sensed it, they said he was foolish. Sush. Muyang took out anguish. By listening to the sonorant, Muyang finished his preparations. First, a horn sprouted out. Muyang was able to multiply time by 8, and each horn added a multiple of 2. When only one horn was sprouted, the time accelerated by 2 times. Inversely, the duration was much longer. If he only sprouted one horn, he could maintain it for over 5 minutes. As if Muyang had no chance against him, black spheres were created from the hellhorse's wings. The black sphere flew towards Muyang and restricted his movements. Explosions didn't occur, but it was an attack where the area itself was corroded. It wasn't strange to call it a small black hole. Instantly, the surrounding region was a mess. It was disrupted with shapes that seemed as though a monster opened its mouth and took bites out of it. Muyang's horns increased to 2. He escaped the erupted zones quickly. Although he graced them a bit because of his over 400 magic resistance, he didn't receive much damage. If magic resistance was 400, those attacks could almost be nullified as long as he doesn't get hit directly. There was also Belt of Ares, which ignored skills below B rank. In short, his body became incompatible with the hellhorse, who used mostly magic skills. Muyang sliced the black sphere that flew right towards him into 2 complete halves with anguish. As speed, strength, and resistance were added, he was able to simply slice the black hole attacks. It was something unthinkable if it was him in the past. Compared to your sense of confidence, this is nothing. Blaze. The hellhorse's entire body burned with hellfire. He was furious, and this was circumstantial evidence that he was that much taken back. Normally, you couldn't really feel the person improve if you see them every day and stay beside them. When the hellhorse first saw Muyang, he was completely weak compared to him, and the hellhorse disregarded him as he thought Muyang would always be below him even if he improved. But that opponent had directly faced his attack. How could he not be surprised? Muyang grinned. As expected, he is strong. Unlike the hellhorse, Muyang observed his behavior closely from the very beginning. Because he thought he would one day face him, he watched his every move. Simply by looking at their fighting power, the hellhorse slightly exceeded the second level of the top rank, but if he looked at his utilization, the hellhorse was in a level where it was meaningless to even divide the levels. However, he has a weakness. That he would spurt out stronger flames as he gets worked up. That fire was the hellhorse's source of life. If Muyang could just suppress that fire, it was like suppressing the hellhorse. Zayip. Ice crystals formed on anguish. Then, on top of anguish, a countless number of ice needles floated. Squall's cruelty, poison fog, and soul's tale. At the same time, a powerful wind blew, ice needles were spewed, and poisonous fog appeared. Then, as if he accepted the frontal confrontation, the hellhorse started to dash towards Muyang. The hellfire burned everything. There was no way the hell horse would allow mere ice to touch him. Unfit for the name Zero Explosion, it couldn't even explode. Then Muyang, who nodded his head, had another horn sprout from his head. With this, 3 horns now adorned his head. 8 times. The world slowed down even further. A feeling as if only he was left on a stranded world by himself. But he was used to it. The moment he lifted his feet into midair, Muyang rushed recklessly. He just looked straight ahead and ran as he felt the air's resistance. They said everything had grains. Because fire's nature was very tempered and fierce, he wasn't able to see the grains. But in the world where it was slowed down by 8 times, he was able to see them. I didn't expect fire to have grains as well. He didn't know when it was 4 times slower. It was the truth he found out when the horns became 3 and he felt the world slowed by 8 times. Perhaps there might be grains to things that aren't visible, like air and the huge underworld itself. There might be a world which you couldn't see at a few 100 times slower. Just by the thought of it, he felt a shudder. Kingslayer left Muyang with something that didn't make sense. The Hell Horse immediate proximity. First, the clone, which was created by the soul's tail, jumped up from Muyang's back. Because he had skillfully blocked the Hell Horse's view, the Hell Horse didn't notice. Clone. Of course, because it had a similar energy as him, it was hard to differentiate unless you checked with your eyes. The clone had ice crystals all over its body. Zero Explosion. The clone became the Zero Explosion itself and approached the Hell Horse. Crush. Due to the explosion, the flames shook. Within that time, Muyang's eyes quickly took notice of the flame. I can see it. The grains. Even the hellfire had grains. Although it wasn't visible because it was hidden underneath other flames, but when the Hell Horse shook due to the Zero Explosion, Muyang was definitely able to see them. If that was so, he had no reason to hesitate. The Hell Horse tried to revitalize the flames to cover his entire body again, but he was 1 step behind. Swoosh. Without a single error, with unnatural grace, the Hell Horse and Muyang passed by each other. Afterwards, the two stood still. However, the first to collapse was the Hell Horse. While Muyang turned his body and looked at the Hell Horse, he removed his horns. The Hell Horse's flames completely died out. To the Hell Horse, it is his source of life. He couldn't aim for anything else but his very life. The Hell Horse was too strong for him to be relaxed. However, it wasn't like there wasn't a way to heal him. Muyang turned his gaze. Bira. The unicorn that received Muyang's gaze shivered. Can you treat him? The unicorn was a magical beast that was considered the best among light types. Rather than calling it a monster, it was more fitting to call it a holy beast. There was also Bei Sungmin, who had the powers of a saint, but still he was lacking compared to a unicorn. However, the unicorn didn't move and just shivered her body. Woohee. Woohee, husband. Leave it to Woohee. Her voice was filled with confidence. As if her turn had finally come, Woohee flew across to the unicorn. And after some dialogue, the unicorn moved as she showed her beauty. It was a surprise. Afterwards, the unicorn specifically approached the Hell Horse and smacked her lips to his cheek. Then the unicorn's horn showed vivid light and started to revive the Hell Horse's flames. After that, things were being done swiftly. After about 10 minutes later, the flames returned to their original state. Miai? The Hell Horse blinked his eyes. He seemed like he didn't know what was going on. Then he jumped up after looking at the unicorn right next to him. The unicorn turned her body, but she wasn't cold to him like before. Blacky Whitey saved you. You should be good to her. Understand? As Woohee furtively gave him advice, the Hell Horse's eyes sparkled. In other words, it meant that he still had a chance. Once again he started to hit on the unicorn. Hell Horse, I believe you will keep your promise. The Hell Horse looked at Muyang as he closed one of his eyes. Muyang wasn't the type to not know what that meant. It seemed like it was more important for him to win her over than the fight. Yuck. Woohee grabbed her chest as if she wasn't feeling good by watching him. The Hell Horse kept his promise. He was quite trustworthy in that way. Not soon after, the devil's long night ended, and at that same time, The castle's restoration was complete. A plus. Childbirth support. The losses were quite high. But they should be able to increase the population with the right facilities, having no worries about food. Muyang built associating facilities and stationed people. He used a bit more strength towards the people's welfare. The Lord is working hard for our sake. Thank you. Indeed, he's our has more wisdom than anyone else. It wasn't a big deal. But everyone was moved and idolized Muyang even more. He just did it to increase the birth rate and strengthen the power of the territory. This sort of reaction wasn't expected. My little movements influenced them greatly. It was a type of realization. And Muyang thought of the time before he returned to the past. Wang Chunglin removed Muyang's free will and just tried to rule over him. But that suppression would eventually be broken. Muyang promised that he wouldn't follow that path. I'm different from you, Wang Chunglin. The leader of the Forest of Death. Just a bit more. It won't be long until the day I break your neck. Clench. Muyang clenched his fist so hard that it could shatter into pieces. There was no way he would forget the things he went through while he was in the Forest of Death. He just tried hard not to think of it because he was busy moving forward. However, now the picture was slowly being drawn. Just a bit more. Only a few steps left. He wanted to run now and clench Wang Chunglin's neck in his hands, but to make sure of his fall, Muyang needed to take a breath. That's right. The process of taking a breath. Since the devil's long night had ended, I probably need to act. Right away, Muyang made his next plan. There were things he needed to find first. Although Orus's throne is just an accessory, if I can find the Hamel's rune ring, I can earn the Diablos. The Hamel's rune ring. The lunatic sovereign's ring and the Orus's throne ring. All that was left was that ring. If he could get the 3 rings, he could make an S-rank weapon. He wasn't sure of the exact rank, but it could be an even greater weapon that could split skies and cleave the earth. Splendors would definitely be thrilling. But Hamel's rune ring isn't in the demon god's territory. Muyang rubbed his chin. That was the reason why Muyang was trying to find the Hamel's rune ring last. It wasn't in the demon god's territory and he couldn't earn it from a trial. The next destination was not in the demon god's territory but another place. The Sun Guild. One of the 9 guilds in the organization where Alexandro Quintart was the leader. He needed to break into that place and get the ring. He was unsure who would be wearing the ring, as the owner constantly changed. It was due to the division within the guild. The Sun Guild was the most turbulent guild and its strife has never ended. It was amazing that Alexandro Quintart continued to seize power even among those times, but either way, if Muyang was to use their division and seize an opportunity, there might be a way. Muyang's heart raced even faster as it was a place which held many memories for Muyang in variety of different ways. The Great City. The starting point for all survivors, which was connected to the Blue Temple. People endured 1 month at the Blue Temple, then came to this place to check their aptitude. It was also the place where people fell behind, were absorbed by different groups, clung to others or died afterwards. It was a completely huge castle where hundreds of thousands of people could live together. That was the Great City. That crazy bastard, he starts again today. Is he a mercenary or what? Why does he come here and do that? Tiske, I wonder what Luminescent Guild is doing. That luminescent mark is a waste. He's really tarnishing their reputation. In a corner of the Great City, a dark place that was dug up like an underground cave, a man stood among the mercenaries. As the man appeared at that place, everyone clicked their tongues. The man who wore light plate armor, boots, etc. was Kim Taehwan. He had the luminescent mark on his shoulder, but the moment Kim Taehwan appeared, he sat down in the middle of the mercenaries after bringing a sign and a chair. This place was the mercenaries' market. It was a place where the mercenaries who couldn't find work came to look for work personally. At that place, Kim Taehwan crossed his arms and quietly closed his eyes. If you desperately need help, I will help you. All that was written on the sign was this. There was no one who didn't know of him, as the message was automatically translated if you wore the status viewer. and the content itself was flawless. So, truly there were people who asked Kim Tae-hwan for help in the beginning. Among them, a few were rejected by Tae-hwan, and the ones he accepted weren't much of a help. In other words, sloppy. To solve complex problems in the underworld, Tae-hwan was short of experience. Only a year. Since it had not been long since he arrived in the underworld, everything couldn't be solved just because he was strong. However, Tae-hwan was highly enthusiastic. At least he didn't try to solve everything carelessly. So he was oddly quite popular, since there were a few requests even in a day. On the other hand, the mercenaries thought Tae-hwan as a thorn on their side as he took away their jobs. The Luminescent Guild was one of the 9 biggest guilds. Why would a new recruit of that great guild appear in the mercenaries market? He was probably known as a queer one even within the Luminescent Guild. Let's not be impatient. There isn't anyone within the guild who has high hopes for me. Then I need to thoroughly develop from the bottom. Kim Tae-hwan made a promise and stayed at his spot even today. With the size of the Luminescent Guild, they had many talented individuals. Tae-hwan was definitely a new recruit who stood out, but still, there weren't many people who had high hopes for him. It was because the existing vested interests were controlling everything. All they did was support to a point. Besides that, everything was fierce. They needed to develop on their own. Tae-hwan was planning to go up from the bottom thoroughly. Who the hell is he? He's fully armed. That's how you die from suffocation. From the looks of him, he probably is a wanderer. Here at the underground, fashion victims die, child. The mockeries of the mercenaries unexpectedly filled the surrounding. The sound of kiki, kiki, which disturbed his ears, was among them. Tae-hwan furtively opened his eyes. At the same time, someone who was definitely not suited for this place called the underground came within his sight. In the darkest, dampest, and dirtiest of places, the mercenaries' market where the untouchables lived. Fully armored truly suited him. From the head to toe, the combination of equipment. Even if others used observation-type skills, they were unable to identify them. Mu-young had used a talisman to hide his stats and information about his equipment. However, if someone was to be determined, it wasn't that hard to find it. They were hard to find formally, but Mu-young knew many mercenaries' unofficial routes in this underground area. Anyways, there weren't any mercenaries who came to the underground with that much armor. But the man quietly leaned against the wall, as if he didn't care about the gaze of surrounding mercenaries. That sword is... But Tae-hwan's gaze reached the man's sword. For some reason it was a sword he was familiar with. Its curve and form, he thought he saw it a lot somewhere. Ah. After pondering for a while, Tae-hwan was able to realize. Anguish, it was anguish. It was Mu-young's sword. In the past, Tae-hwan was with Mu-young in the Blue Temple, and Mu-young had earned anguish after finding the Star of David and finishing the trial there. Tae-hwan also earned the Shield of Eradication there. It's a bit different. However, he then was disappointed. The overall contour was similar, but the detailed parts were different. Tae-hwan had a good memory, and things regarding Mu-young were especially difficult to easily forget. There was no way for him to make a mistake. You can't last long like that. Then Tae-hwan turned his attention away. Here the underground was truly wild. If you drew attention, everyone attacked you together. It was also the reason why Tae-hwan purposely went lightly equipped. To survive, you needed to have a certain degree of blending in. However, the man showed no signs of it. He didn't seem like he knew anything about the physiology of the underground. If you stood out, there might be a lot of requests, but you couldn't complete all the work without the help of other mercenaries. And if you were too greedy, they would kill you. In the end, they would give up on their own or would leave after being harassed by mercenaries. Either way, it was hard for it to end well. Ballet Guild has requested 3 swordsmanship and shieldsmanship instructors. They say you are a must. Will you go with me? Then a man who approached Tae-hwan from the side spoke to him. Tae-hwan nodded his head. Sure. The owner of the Ballet Guild had 2 sons. The 2 were now both at an age where they should slowly learn swordsmanship. Since it wasn't a hard thing to do, It wasn't a bad idea to repay the debt of a fellow mercenary. Taejuan heard that he was sloppy and made lots of mistakes, but he was diligently making his own people. For change within the guild, he needed his own people. And basically this place was the place where he could find people who could be his wingmen. Before leaving the underground, Taejuan once again looked at the man who was fully armored before he turned around. In any case, he wouldn't last long. A quarter of a day. After Taejuan finished his instructor duty at the ballet guild and returned to the underground, the man was still there leaning against the wall. However, the surrounding reactions were odd. He felt a few mercenaries who didn't want to approach the man. A strange silence and nervousness had settled. It was a mood that didn't make sense in the underground. "Hey, did something happen?" Taejuan asked a mercenary who was still at the underground. Then the mercenary cautiously nodded his head. "That son of a B*Th, that B*Th isn't human." Mercenaries. Among them, if they were an underground mercenary, they were well known as tough. Being called inhuman was like a compliment to each other. However, it seemed like the meaning behind the words, that B*Th isn't human said by this mercenary, was slightly different than that. What the hell had happened here? Just a quarter of a day. Within a day their understanding of him changed. He couldn't help but be curious, and the mercenary just gulped his saliva. A corpse sorcerer. A corpse sorcerer? Yeah. That bastard deals with corpses. Now he could understand why the mercenaries were so tensed up. There was clearly a bias towards corpse sorcerers in a bad way. All of the 5 clans were divided into the Lawless Clan, Beast Clan, Advanced Clan, Rain Clan, and Command Clan, but the only clan which was stated last had corpse sorcerers as their main members. And Command Clan's people were well known to be vicious. It was a place that dealt with corpses, and to obtain a high-level corpse, they even ignored moral sense. Because their power was so great, no one touched them. This also was one of the rotten pus of the underworld. Then he is a member of the Command Clan? Probably. Sheet, why are these bastards who had a place at the front coming here one by one these days? The Command Clan was a group that wasn't located in the great city. They created a village and lived there, which was a closed area about 50 days of travel by horse from the great city. But these days the corpse sorcerers were one by one coming out to the world. All one by one powerful people. It meant that that person was also the same case. It was an enough reason for even the mercenaries of the underground to avoid. So, a person had died. Taejuan nodded as he looked at the surrounding situation. Someone fucked with him, and the scuffle resulted in the person dying. And the dead person started to move as a corpse. The lifeless figure that was currently moping around the man seemed to be the one revived as an undead. However, this place had a low sense of comradeship. Revenge? There was no way such a thing would happen. There was no one who would interrogate another even if someone died. These were the mercenaries of the underground. Even more, since they found out that he was a corpse sorcerer, they would be busy trying to spare themselves. Maybe because the timing was wrong. Damn, I'll end it for today. The mercenary left his spot. Kim Taejuan had a good look at the man and rubbed his chin. A corpse sorcerer. There isn't anything good in meddling with him. It's even more so if he was a member of the Command Clan. The man would not be of help to his great cause. So he decided not to be involved as much as he can. The next day, a man showed up at the underground. He was a young man with the Sun Guild mark on his shoulder. A new trial was created in the dungeon under Sun Guild's jurisdiction. To those who participate, we will give 2 C rank talismans. What sort of trial is it? As a mercenary asked, the man put on a sour face as he replied. I don't know much about it. It isn't dangerous. Since it's a trial in a low-level dungeon. Let's just say it is an exploration to figure out if the trial is dangerous or not. A trial exploration. It was quite hit or miss. However, if it was a trial that occurred in a low-level dungeon, as he said, it was most likely for it to not be a big deal. 2 C-rank talismans were enough goods for him to find 3 months' worth of food. For mercenaries who lived hand to mouth, It was a quite a tempting offer. Is there a limit on the number of applicants? No. That was all. All of the mercenaries in the underground participated. Aren't you a member of the Luminescent Guild? Then the man from the Sun Guild asked Taehwan. Taehwan just smiled a little. They say that there is someone odd in the Luminescent Guild. I guess you are that person. If you participate, I'll make an exception and give you 2 B-rank talismans. That's not necessary. Just give me what you offer to everyone else. You sure? That's not a bad deal for me. Taehwan lowered his head slightly. Afterwards, all the mercenaries of the underground moved and followed the man. The dungeon was big. The dungeon managed by the Sun Guild. There were 19 levels of the dungeon, but this place was about level 3. It might be easy to think that basically monsters of orc level were going to appear. Only 5 people can go in the trial at once. Go in order. The middle of the dungeon. While the soldiers of the Sun Guild were protecting the trial, a huge wave of light flew out. And with no option, the soldiers grouped in 5s and entered into the wave of light. What rotten luck. For me to be teamed with a corpse sorcerer of all people. From right beside Taehwan he could hear sounds of dissatisfaction. It's best to not be involved, but... Taehwan also let out a sigh inwardly. His decision to not get involved as much as he can was broken within just a few days. However, it wasn't like he could reverse it at this point. Are you not giving out the talismans needed to return? It's the trial of a low-level dungeon. There's probably many ways to return inside. However, if you want, I will give you 1 talisman that you can use to return by removing one of the C-rank talismans I was going to give you. When a mercenary asked, the manager who controlled the place responded. Usually, when exploring this kind of trial, a return talisman would be given for safety. However, there was a condition that it should be exchanged for the existing compensation. Is it necessary to do that for this kind of trial? In the case of level 3 dungeon trials, it's obvious. Obviously, only a few people made the trade. As if it were nothing, everyone laughed and made their way into the trial. Also, the world changed as 5 people, including Kim Taehwan, crossed the spotlight. You have entered the trial room of the Flesh Hounds. Up to 5 people can cross at a time. Hunt the Flesh Hounds and reach the end of the trial. There isn't much content. By the way, what is a Flesh Hound? That's a name I've never heard of before. There were several monsters with similar names, but that was all. There were no monsters with the name of Flesh Hound. I'll take the lead. At that moment, Kim Taehwan came forward. Although he hadn't been in the underworld for long, he was a member of the prestigious Luminescent Guild. In addition, he lived in an underground tunnel for a year and achieved some skills. His level was sufficient to take the lead here. Everyone knew him and did not object. Survival. Because they were mercenaries, there were no words that were as precious as the word survival in unfamiliar places. Over there, what is your name? After properly positioning the mercenary troops, Kim Taehwan asked the man who wore full body armor. The man thought for a moment and took the furthest position at the back. Will you be okay? The rear guard was as dangerous of a place as the lead. No, it was more likely to be more dangerous than the lead. This was because most of the hidden monsters sought and approached at the back. But the man did not answer. A tacit affirmation. However, if he's like this, it was questionable as to whether he was really mute or not. If there isn't a problem, let's go. But if he was truly a member of the Command Clan, Kim Taehwan didn't have to pay him any attention. And so 5 people started to make their way into the unknown trial. The appearance of the Flesh Hounds were absolutely hideous. The flesh of its entire body was covered with blotchy tumors that bulged out, and there was a seam on each spot as if someone had contrived to put them together. It's close to a chimera. Kim Taehwan's shield shook greatly. 1 Flesh Hound wasn't much, but they moved in groups of at least 100. Groar. These sons of B** cheese want to die. Gaia. Pie arm. The mercenaries violently brandished their weapons as they spoke harsh words. But it was hard to block 10 hands with one. Occasionally they were unable to stop the flesh hounds from attacking them. "I'll stop it. Everyone to the back." But Kim Tae-hwan's shield was embedded in the ground. His unique class, Guardian of Eradication. It was time for him to exert the power he'd gained through the Shield of Eradication. Twanging. An intangible energy spread out in a straight line along the lines of the shield. It was as if they were splitting the ground. Then even the flesh hounds were unable to cross the intangible line. It had created an invisible wall. Thump, thump. The flesh hounds threw themselves. But the wall never broke. The hounds studied each other's faces and withdrew. "Do they have intelligence?" Kim Tae-hwan cast a surprised glance at the sight. Soon after leaving only the bodies of flesh hounds, there were 5 people remaining in the vacant space. "Yuff. You're injured. Let me help, just endure this." Kim Tae-hwan, who took out a compression bandage, wrapped the wounds of the mercenaries and used a red potion. Take it off. I'll never repay you for the value of that potion." But the mercenaries refused. In the world of mercenaries, the concept of borrowing was rare. If you were given, you had to compensate for it with something of similar value. And potions were too expensive for common mercenaries to buy. "I won't ask you to repay it. If you don't want to lose your arm, stay put." "That is it for real? You should know well that I don't lie." "Fine. Do whatever you want." After the mercenaries gave up, the rest went quickly. However, even though the flesh hounds were gone, it wasn't safe. To have searched only this much is enough, isn't it? If I'd known this would happen, I would have taken the talisman. They had troubled expressions. The intensity of the trials were greater than he thought. However, there was no way to return right away. Live or die, first he had no choice but to explore more trials. Rumble, rumble, rumble. There was the sound of countless footsteps in the distance. Everyone knew what that sound meant. Crazy. They brought their comrades. Fuck. What was originally 100 turned into a good 500 or 600. Whereas only 5 people were gathered here. "Everyone back. Go back to the starting point." Kim Tae-hwan reluctantly yelled. Before long they turned around and started fleeing. Swoosh. Only one man walked towards the hounds. When he raised his sword, flames rose from his body. Roar. Right away a strong wind blew around the man's body. The flames quickly spread and devoured the flesh hounds in an instant. Slosh. That was not all. Dozens of ice spikes were formed in the air when the man swung his sword. Boom. Boom, boom, boom. The ice spikes created powerful explosions when they hit the floor. Kiking. Gegagang. The flesh hounds screamed. Overwhelming. They simply weren't his opponents. Everyone was looking at the scene in awe. After this, the order of their formation changed. As if he already knew the way, the man moved through the ordeal without hesitation. Who the hell is he? Of course, it was the question everyone had. His main skills seemed to be at least 300. With that amount of power, he would be treated as an elite even in a major guild. Command Clan. The Command Clan wasn't a guild, but it was one of the 5 great clans. If he was an elite of one of the 5 great clans, there was nothing strange about him exerting this much power. Thump. Thud. Eventually, after breaking the marble-shaped nucleus that was placed at the end, the trial ended. Trial, Room of the Flesh Hound has been excellently fulfilled. Amazing achievement. A random B rank talisman has been given to the 5 persons who solved the trial. B rank. Sheet, did they really say B rank? The mercenaries grinned widely. If you received a decent, useful B rank talisman, it was possible to buy a small house on the outskirts. If it was a B rank talisman with a good ability, you would be able to afford a bigger house. Normally, 5 lower-level talismans were equal to 1 higher-leveled one, so it was no different from receiving 5 C-rank talismans. Afterwards, when they escaped the trial with broad smiles, the manager looked puzzled. "Oh ho. Did you break the trial?" "We were lucky." "No. It was because your skills are outstanding." Can you explain the situation inside in detail? The manager seemed quite interested in this part. Why was he? The manager seemed to have some sort of position within the Sun Guild. However, he personally recruited mercenaries and tried to listen to their stories to learn more about this trial. It wouldn't have been simply for entertainment. What should I do? In order to explain, it was inevitable that the man from the Command clan would be revealed. The manager could change his attitude when he realized the man had unusual power and was from the Command clan. However, since it was true that they did receive help, the words didn't easily fall from their lips. I'll explain that. Hee hee. At that moment, a mercenary soldier came out. Really? Give it a try. So, it was the trial called the Room of the Flesh Hound. That guy Kim Tae-hwan did a great job there. Let me tell you in detail. The mercenary appropriately mingled the truth with lies and concealed the man's identity. With a little more time, Kim Tae-hwan realized the man's intentions. It meant he would continue to have team play with the man. For them, the man seemed to be a rookie that was just strong and unknowing of the ways of the world. Since I got a B-rank talisman, I'll take this guy with me and reap more benefits. These were his thoughts. I want to know a little more too. Kim Tae-hwan condoned it. He also wanted to learn more about the man's identity. And that was how we were able to get out of there safely. All thanks to Kim Tae-hwan's help. Haha. That's impressive. The manager's eyes lingered on Kim Tae-hwan. I was lucky. Luck, you say? In that case, I would like to give you more work. What do you think? By work, you mean? Recently, similar things continue to happen in the great city. Our Sun Guild intends to fix this problem. Perhaps the Luminescent Guild will concur on this part. I understand. I'm willing to take care of it. Kim Tae-hwan nodded his head. If this work was important, he wanted to move from the center and have his skills recognized. Since the Sun Guild was managing the problem on their own, it surely would be inconsequential. It was worth getting directly involved. The man was capable of breaking through the hard trials on his own. Thanks to him, the work was incredibly easy and the mercenaries who were with him were almost sitting on gold cushions. This is really insane. If this keeps going well, I can retire. Exactly. I would also be able to get a small store in the center. That black warrior is a perfect lucky charm. The soldiers looked at the man in full armor that they called the Black Warrior. They had dealt with 5 trials. It had only been a month. During that time they had received huge rewards and were agonizing over how to use them. Of course, through that their guard increased. There were people who would attack them seeking to steal their compensation. There were signs that they were trying not to be too close to each other. This job was unusual. The Sun Guild was using mercenaries even though they have the manpower to handle it without being disadvantaged. However, Kim Tae-hwan hardened his expression. They had already completed 5 trials, but everyone wasn't happy. First, there were lots of chimera-type monsters in all of the trials. They were similar in goals in that the trial ended when the nucleus was destroyed. Like a box of trials, someone seemed to have made these trials on purpose. Such suspicions arose. When I return from this one, I'll look for a woman first. I want to soak my body in hot water. Their last trial took place on the outskirts of the great city. They were returning to the great city after finishing the trial. Just imagining things after returning seemed to relieve fatigue. But there were people who blocked them. Who are you? Kim Tae-hwan went ahead and spoke. They were dressed in orthodox costumes and wore animal bone helmets. They were exactly 10 in number. You were too cocky. The death god is angry. You must pay with your life. I, under the name of Hyung Bish. An awkward way of speaking. A man who looked like their leader raised a small dagger. Then he drew the dagger across his wrists. There were countless stab wounds on his wrist. Fuck. When the blood gushed out, it sprayed onto the ground. Rumble. A short moment later, the blood swelled up beneath the earth and level 5 monsters burst out. Juncture 1. The Command Clan. All of the 5 spirit monsters were Juncture. They also were very dark in color. Kim Tae-hwan immediately recognized that they were Command Clan elites. So you have something to do with this. It was a gut feeling, but he was almost certain. The fact that the Sun Guild was moving all its troops was related to the Command Clan. It's the Black Jiangshi, the birth of the Great One. They are the followers who will become the foundation. The man Hyungbish was confident. If it was 5 Black Jiangshi, they were strong enough to defeat the mercenaries and be unharmed. Even Kim Tae-hwan knew that. He'd never personally dealt with a Black Jiangshi, but he knew what he'd heard when people spoke about the Command Clan. Oh, if you see the Command Clan's Black Jiangshi, don't look back and run away. No matter who it was. It was said to be that strong. Everyone draw your weapons. Kim Tae-hwan shouted urgently. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The thread was broken. Myung, why do you do that? Myung turned his head. An elegant girl. She was dressed in an all-white dress and was sitting on top of the castle while drinking tea. Myung shook his head. You're as taciturn as ever. Indeed, you probably hate having a conversation with someone like me. The girl grew sulky. Pat. Myung put his hand on the girl's head. It won't be good to stay with me. Are you really okay? Right now the guild is in a total emergency. Because Alexandra went missing. Myung nodded. The girl smiled. This place was the Sun Guild's main castle. The girl was Alexandra's 7th daughter. She had no power or strength, but she was the perfect girl to use as a shield if something was to happen. Thank you. If anything happens, I'll at least protect you. If my marriage is successful, it will definitely be possible. The girl sighed. Myung removed his hand. The girl showed slight disappointment, but it couldn't be helped. After this he looked down from the castle. The clone's senses have been cut off and finally the informant has appeared. Right now he was concerned about other things than the girl. The clone burst. And the clone's memories came into his mind in detail. The Command Clan. The corner of Myung's mouth twitched. The ones who interfered with the work this time. The clone he'd dispatched after earning Hamel's rune ring for more gains finally had them by the tail. 1. Note. Jiangshi is a kind of Chinese hopping zombie. A late night. Myung was lost in thought for a moment as he sat on the ledge of the castle. How was Myung in the main castle of the Sun Guild? To explain this situation he needed to return to 40 days before. First, to earn the Hamel's rune ring, Myung left the demon god's territory and entered the great city right away. He infiltrated the Sun Guild by forging his identity, and afterwards he realized that Alexandro Quintart was missing. On top of that, it was then that he realized something strange was continuously occurring within the great city. The Sun Guild and Arpeggio Guild's collusion. If my memories were correct, there were many people who tried to interfere with their plan. Also, through this event, a lot of Alexandro Quintart's children died. Arpeggio Guild was also one of the 9 great guilds. The Sun Guild tried to ally with them by an arranged marriage. However, from his memories he believed it didn't go through. Since all of Alexandro Quintart's children who were to be married died by the hands of those who tried to interfere with their plan. An arranged marriage is just a formal affair on the surface. There is a hidden story hidden behind it. Alexandro's disappearance was on Myung's mind. Someone of that much strength wouldn't have just hidden his identity, and even if he was to be ambushed, he wasn't the type for that to work. However, the details of these events weren't available to Myung. He could only try to predict what would happen, as during this period he had been kidnapped by Wang Chunglin and was training. He just remembered a decent amount of information from documents and the history of his status viewers later on. However, there was a person who helped Myung's actions. Ataraxia. An assassin who handled snakes. The moment he tried to leave the demon god's territory, the man ambushed him, but Myung defeated the assassin as if he was nothing. Myung had doubts about the fact that the assassin was specifically after him, and found out about who was pulling the strings behind the assassin. He had turned the assassin into a living undead and heard about his story. Alexandro tossed his family out as bait and is waiting for someone to appear. Announcing the absence of the guild master and waiting for someone to appear at the moment when the guild is vulnerable. It was his overall conclusion he made after listening to the information and people's stories. Alexandro's disappearance was definitely done on purpose. He didn't even try to hide this fact. Furthermore, the Sun Guild was currently in a situation where they were moving all their troops to take care of different disturbances. If there were any hostile organizations, now was the right time to strike the Sun Guild. What is he trying to earn? For the leader of the Sun Guild, the guild that was considered the top of the largest 9 guilds, to act on his own. Myung knew how big Alexandro's greed was. An item he would earn by mobilizing this sort of operation. Even Myung couldn't help but be greatly interested. Perhaps the Hamel's rune ring was nothing compared to the item Alexandro wanted. To find out what exactly was the item, Myung accepted a job as the top bodyguard of the 7th daughter Hyacinth, who was expected to have an arranged marriage with someone from the Arpeggio Guild. First, I'm certain that someone from the Command clan is pulling the strings. Hyung Bish. A difficult guy has appeared. Hyung Bish was someone who Myung knew well of. He was able to freely deal with Black Jiangshi and even had high personal fighting power and intelligence, to the point that he was an opponent who was hard to manage. Hyung Bish fought with Myung in the past once. Although it was before Myung had become the top assassin, he had developed quite a bit by fighting with him. In many ways he was an opponent he remembered. He was a person who was extremely careful. It was the right thing for him to dispatch his clone. Bae Sung-min. Swoosh. Bae Sung-min, who was assimilated with darkness, appeared behind Myung. Myung spoke calmly. With Taken, follow the energy of death. The ones who deal with Jiangshi. There won't be many who could stop you guys in the great city right now. Just follow them. Find them and kill them. And find out everything. I understand. Swoosh. Bae Sung-min returned to the darkness once again. Myung was planning to start participating in this mess. Although he was there as a bodyguard, he wasn't sure when enemies would invade. Before then, Myung was planning to attack the Command clan and get information. Either way, the great city was currently chaos itself. He became more certain after entering the Sun Guild. There were very few people who could stop Taken and Bae Sung-min, but if the two were active in the darkness, they wouldn't be able to find them. I don't need to earn Hamel's rune ring right now. Myung thought of Hyacinth, the 7th daughter of Alexandro. The small girl was wearing Hamel's rune ring. And he didn't need to take it again right now. It was because the owner had to die for the ownership to be transferred over to a different person. Hyacinth woke up as she stretched her body. As she looked around drooling with her vacant look, she saw 2 maids. It's time for breakfast. Please get ready. The maids took off Hyacinth's pajamas, washed her with the bowl they brought, and put a white dress on her. Can't I just skip breakfast? You must eat breakfast. Isn't that the only thing Alexandro wants from his family? Alexandro is... I understand. After letting out a big sigh, Hyacinth trudged. Alexandro. It was sad how she couldn't call her father father. Everyone said Alexandro was brass-necked and cold-hearted, but that he was warm in his own way towards his family. That was why the family mealtime was always full of laughter, but Hyacinth recently realized that all of it was a mask. It was a peace maintained only because Alexandro was there. Right now, when he wasn't there, everyone became wolves who were after his interests. They were too busy ripping each other apart, and the days of harmony were in the past. Prig. As she opened the door and went out, a man lowered his head. Myung. I'm sorry. Were you waiting for me? As if she was never in low spirit, Hyacinth smiled a beautiful smile. It was a good smile that showed the girl's purity. Honestly, Hyacinth didn't know much about Myung. She just knew that Myung was a member of the legendary Prestige Knights in the past, and that he accepted their wishes and was wandering around the world. Of course, she didn't know Myung had forged these truths. Just in the girl's eyes, the fact that he was a member of the Prestige Knights greatly appealed to her. The legend that had disappeared now. The ones who held the record of killing 8 demon kings more than 30 years ago. Young had the swordsmanship skills and the heavy atmosphere to match. His image didn't seem lacking when compared to a Prince Charming. Even more, that knight had chosen no other person than her. That pride was like an oasis in the desert in her current situation. No, my lady. Really? I'm glad. Then please escort me. Hyacinth slightly lowered her back and offered her right hand. She was wearing white gloves, but it was so thin that it seemed like it would break if someone tapped it. Hyacinth's cheeks became slightly rosy. Young lightly held her right hand and started to walk forward. Within the Sun Guild, there were 15 people who could be considered as Alexandro's family. 15 people would sit around a circular table and eat their meals. Normally, it was against the rules for a bodyguard to enter this place, but after Alexandro had disappeared, one bodyguard was allowed for each person. Of course, more than 100 men were on standby outside. It was justified that in case of an emergency they needed to enter to manage things, but in reality, it was all posture and a part of the power struggle. This is no different than a Cold War. The atmosphere was completely cold as ice. It was difficult to determine if the food was going through their nose or mouth. At this point. Of course, Hyacinth was frozen. But, as she dropped the fork she was holding, other people glared fiercely at her right away. Among them, a quite old woman with glasses let out a sigh. Hyacinth, why are you so sloppy as a girl? I'm worried. Do you know that you will be an embarrassment to our family if you act like that even at the Arpeggio Guild? I'm sorry, sister. Hyacinth lowered her head deeply. Hyacinth was the youngest and she received love that much greater from Alexandro. After he disappeared, the rebound was devastating to her. Sister, don't be too hard on her. Isn't her potential spouse that playboy among all men? Of course she would be uneasy. A man laughed as he covered his mouth. At the same time a few also bursted in laughter. As they did this, Hyacinth's head lowered even further. Hyacinth's marriage partner was a playboy that most people knew of. He had already married 5 times and was also called human trash, as the previous wife had even died. Hyacinth was being sold off to that sort of man. Although they say it was for the unification of the Sun Guild and the Arpeggio Guild, it was completely appalling. Since it won't be long until you leave, be more careful of your behavior. Yes. They didn't care about Hyacinth. She was the lowest in rank and was in a position to be sold off to the worst man. There was something else that was the main issue. We can't keep Alexandro's position continuously empty. I should obviously take on his position. I have handled the administrative tasks for numerous years following Alexandro. There is no other person who knows about the guild more than me. That's funny. The guild is currently in danger. Isn't it normal for me, the head of the Fire Dragon Knights, to temporarily take his role? Everyone's voices quickly rose. There was no way for them to find a resolution, and so they fought amongst themselves. By looking at them, you were able to know about the guild situation even if you didn't want to. It's a mess. Even the largest guild, the guild that received the reverence from others, was rotten on the inside. It wasn't just simply the Sun Guild. Other places could only be worse, as they wouldn't be lacking when compared to the Sun Guild. After lowering his head close to the plate, Young looked at Hyacinth. She seemed like she wanted to leave the place as quickly as she could. After breakfast time had ended, Hyacinth headed outside right away. In the outskirts of the castle, where lots of flowers and grasses grew, she prepared a paper and a brush and started to draw a picture. She was very skillful at painting. Just stand like that for a moment. The composition is really good right now. Hyacinth stopped what she was painting and took out another paper. After, she stroked with her brush and painted Young and the surrounding scenery. Since there was nothing he needed to do right away, he did as she wished. How long did it pass since he stood there? I'm finished. How is it? Young simply walked up to Hyacinth and looked at the painting she painted. Young, who was inside the sunflowers, was truly like a picture. It's not bad. I'm glad. Then can I keep this picture? Since Hyacinth drew the picture, you can do whatever you please. Yay. Hyacinth clenched her fists. It was an action that reminded him of a tomboy, but it suited her age. You're having a good time. Then a man with a dozen bodyguards appeared at the scene. It was the man who laughed at Hyacinth as he talked about the playboy during breakfast. His belly plopped out and he seemed to be in his mid-30s. He was Alexandro's fifth child and his name seemed to be Mendini. Me Mendini Appa, too. Hyacinth quickly became froze. Mendini always looked at Hyacinth with a hint of lust. Since there was no way Hyacinth didn't know about this, she instinctively froze. Afterwards, as Mendini approached, Muyang quickly stopped in front of him. After looking at Muyang, Mendini grinned. Aha, are you the prestige knight? You look pretty good on the outside. I don't know if you're a fake or real though. Mendini pushed Muyang aside and looked at Hyacinth's painting. Were you painting a piece of crap like this? At a time like this, huh? Are you saying that you're now leaving the Sun Guild completely? Is that it? It's not that. There are still people who are displeased with your actions. How long are you going to act like a child? Follow me. I will now train you in how you need to act as an adult. Mendini stroked Hyacinth's shoulders before he grabbed her hand. In broad daylight. It wasn't like things like this didn't happen before, but today he was more direct. Hyacinth completely froze. The hairs on her entire body rose. A feeling as though a bug was crawling on her body. Let go of her hand. At that moment, Muyang grabbed Mendini's shoulder. Fwang. Like. Then at the same time a dozen of bodyguards raised their weapon and pointed it at Muyang. And what? I couldn't hear you well, could you say it again? Mendini slowly turned his head. And with a triumphant look on his face he smirked. And so Muyang clearly spoke again. Let go of her hand. They say that a low frequency accompanied a lion's roar and prevented their prey from moving. In other words, an intangible energy greatly influencing a living creature. Muyang was currently like that. As the family member of the Sun Guild's leader, Mendini would have grown up eating well since he was young. That was why he was completely the opposite from Muyang, who went through struggles upon struggles. A sheltered life. His obese body, which didn't even have any calluses. It showed how much he neglected training. It was inconceivable that this sort of man was Alexandro's child. Muyang instinctively knew that Mendini was easily frightened. Muyang was able to judge a person to a certain degree just by their body movement, the movement of their eyes, or the unique scent that flows out when a person is nervous. Unless they were specially trained to hide these sort of emotions. He's pathetic. Muyang inwardly clicked his tongue. He was Alexandro's family. So there was no way he wouldn't have received that sort of training. He would have also developed a mental defense mechanism extremely well. However, Mendini was shivering just from Muyang's forceful words. He was pathetic and furthermore a disappointment. A tiger's child that couldn't even be a dog. Wasn't he just a greedy pig then? Brr. Just by having a taste of Muyang's vigor, Mendini was continuously breaking out into a cold sweat. In Mendini's eyes, Muyang was seen as a king of the underworld. Gruwak. Muyang's hand gradually pushed down on Mendini's shoulder. As Mendini naturally let go of Hyacinth's hand, Muyang threw Mendini to the ground. What are you guys doing? Kill him. The grin disappeared. Mendini spoke with a face brutally ravaged by anger. Then the dozen bodyguards instantly surrounded Muyang. Don't do this. Mendini Appa. You be *Tithi. Did you sleep with that bastard already? Both of you guys will never get away with this. Mendini shouted this as he dragged his butt on the floor, quickly moving back to hide behind his bodyguards. Hyacinth's body shivered faintly. It was because she had never heard of this sort of improper remark. You weren't normally like this, Mendini Appa. Why? Muyang placed his hand on top of Hyacinth, who bursted into tears. Hyacinth must not break down right now. For Muyang's goal, she must not stop fighting against him. So he decided to help her. There's more than meets the eye. Hyacinth was too young. So she needed to be tougher. So no one would disregard her or look down on her just because she was young. During this time when Alexandro had concealed his whereabouts, she needed to create her own territory so that others wouldn't violate it. Muyang quietly whispered, "The world isn't as beautiful as a painting either. This world, this underworld, was filled with filth. The only difference was how much they were covered by it. The world in which everyone lived in was never beautiful or clean." She needed to know this. If she simply avoided this, it would only cause her tragedy one day. Swoosh. Mendini's dozen bodyguards raised their swords. However, Anguish didn't cry. "Are you saying they aren't even worth showing your true color?" Muyang couldn't help but smirk. Anguish didn't even wake up. As if it wasn't a fight it needed to show up for. It meant they were below its standard. It was a completely different attitude compared to when it desired the blood of the monsters in the demon god's territory. It couldn't be helped since the fighting power of humans was very lacking. At most, their main stats would be within 250. Muyang didn't even take out Anguish. Blase. A dragon form created from flame appeared behind Muyang's back. Brr. As the dragon cried loudly, the guards in the surrounding couldn't help but stop lunging towards Muyang. However, the dragon did not have mercy just because they stopped. As it opened its mouth widely, it devoured 5 people instantly. But there wasn't even time for them to burn. They just became ash and fell to the floor. A dragon knight? Everyone was shocked. Mendini's expression was especially worth watching. Mendini only knew that Muyang was a prestige knight. He wasn't well aware of Muyang's skills. There weren't many who volunteered to be Hyacinth's bodyguard and their skills were all lacking, so he wasn't able to fully figure out Muyang. Was he truly a prestige knight? One by one they all burned and disappeared. It was hard to even read Muyang's movements. Was the prestige knights in the legend like him? The ones who fought through thousands, millions of enemies and cut through the necks of demon kings. Afterwards, the ashes of the guards blew away. Mendini was only able to watch with his widened eyes. Humph. Soon, Mendini, who finally recovered his senses, noticed he had wet his pants. He had pissed himself from being afraid. Thump. As Muyang approached, he awkwardly fell and spoke with clenched teeth. "Don't you know who I am? You won't be safe after killing me." Muyang. At the same time, Hyacinth grabbed Muyang's sleeve. Even in this situation, she was worried about Mendini. However, thankfully it didn't seem to be true. Her eyes seemed to be worried about Muyang, as it might be hard for Muyang to manage if things got worse due to Mendini. "I will just cut off the hand that touched you." "What?" Swoosh. Crunch. She didn't even see him move. In the blink of an eye, Anguish popped out and took Mendini's right hand before it returned to its original spot. "Gaiawak. My hand. My hand." Mendini rolled on the ground as he held his wrist as it spurted out blood. Nevertheless, Muyang's face didn't even change in the slightest. Hyacinth momentarily looked at the scene she was seeing. However, that was all. Even if she grew up sheltered in the underworld, seeing a corpse was still an everyday experience. As a prestige knight, there is only one person I serve. Not the Sun Guild and no one else. So you can be more confident. It was obvious who that one person was. Only one person. The sweetness in those words was enough to bring Hyacinth to her senses. Hyacinth clenched her fist as she looked into Muyang's eyes. As if she was making a promise silently. The news about Mendini losing his hand spread far and wide. Of course, a lot of people swarmed in to interrogate Hyacinth, but whenever they did, Hyacinth clearly spoke. "Mendini Appa tried to molest me. As my knight, he just did what he needed to do. There is no way Mendini would do that. You are just lying to protect that knight." Second eldest Uni. 1. It's not a lie. He said that all he did was approach you because he gained interest in your painting. But you cut off his hand? I didn't know you were that spiteful. The only ones who lived after watching the incident were Mendini, Hyacinth, and Muyang. However, the story of both sides was completely different, and the one to give others more faith in was unfortunately Mendini's. I'm telling the truth. But what are you going to do by continuously insisting that it's a lie? Are you telling me to give up Myung's life? By pressuring me with this many soldiers. A few hundred soldiers were positioned inside and outside of her room. However, Hyacinth didn't yield an inch. Normally she would have bent down. The woman who was called the second eldest sister seemed a bit taken back. Of course. We are the foundations of the Sun Guild. An outsider who suddenly appeared tried to kill one of these pillars. Is it not obvious for him to give up his life? If we can't bridge our different views, we have no other choice. Wasn't the system the trial of swords made for these situations? You? The woman widened her eyes. The trial of swords. It was a system created to battle for the truth when a situation arises where people couldn't bridge their differences and it could not be resolved by basic rules. Simply, it was somewhat of a selfish system that stated the stronger person was the winner. However, it was moderately acceptable in the fact that the swords spoke the truth. That system was mentioned by none other than Hyacinth. And Myung stood behind Hyacinth like a great mountain. She is wise. Hyacinth was young and soft-hearted but wasn't simply a gentle girl. To protect herself and Myung, she instinctively knew that this was the only way. She needed to advance forward and not bend the knee to live. Myung was planning to forcefully drag her forward if he needed to, but it was a good thing she realized this on her own. Do you know what you are saying? I do. It is a trial against each other by betting each other's seal. All the children of the Sun Guild had a seal. That seal itself was all of their strength. The trial of swords was a fight with everything on the line. I'll nominate Myung as my substitute. Is my opponent going to be you, Uni? Or Mendini Appa, who is now sick in bed? Were you always this sort of child? It was brothers and sisters who made me like this. Hyacinth didn't back down even an inch. Hence, the woman who was fed up with her turned her body as she clicked her tongue. If you want, I understand. Let's have a trial of swords. It seems like you trust in that prestige knight or whatever he is, but there are much stronger people in our Sun Guild. As if it was too late, even if she regretted her decision, the woman stared at Hyacinth once before she walked away. All of the soldiers followed the woman. Shortly after, Hyacinth sighed deeply in her empty room. I'm still not sure if this is a good thing. Everything will turn out well. Myung was certain. Now while Alexandro is vacant. Through Hyacinth he was going to infiltrate much deeper into the Sun Guild. To strike root and absorb its nutrients. There were a lot of places that only Alexandro and his deputy could enter. Even Myung was reluctant because of the maximum security. However, if Hyacinth collected the family seals and gained a much higher authority, he would be able to enter those places. Even though Hyacinth was arranged to be married to another guild, it was only on the surface. On top of that, if Hyacinth was able to gain authority, she would be able to refuse that sort of promise. The Sun Guild was a place with that sort of strength. Even more, it was told that there was a mountain of numerous hidden treasures and information in the Sun Guild. Even in the past, Myung was unable to properly steal from this place. It was exciting just by imagining what could be in this place. A moment later, Hyacinth spoke as if she relaxed a bit. But when did you start talking using the familiar form? Is it uncomfortable? It's good. I like this better. Myung wasn't sure what was good, but Hyacinth nodded after thinking for a second. Coming to an internal decision, she continued to talk. From now on, when it's just us, call me Haya. It's my nickname. I only allow people who are close to me to call me. Try saying it. Haya. I'll say it later. Not later now. Haya. Haya. At the same time, Hyacinth blushed her cheeks. Good job. Continue to call me that. As if she felt awkward, she plumped herself onto the bed. Myung sat beside her. Within the silence, a trust was formed. The substitute Mendini brought was an experienced warrior with a red beard. Bastille. He was a strong man, definitely strong enough to be in the top 300 humans. However, his strength was lacking compared to Muyang's flames. Bastile's red beard was on fire due to Muyang's dragon flames. But then everyone looked at Bastile, who lose consciousness and fall to the floor, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. An unexpected change. An unexpected change close to a natural calamity had occurred. No matter how strong Muyang was, Bastile was a warrior who was labeled as one of the strongest within the Sun Guild. This is unbelievable. Mendini, who watched this scene from afar, foamed at the mouth and passed out. The tradition of the Sun Guild. He lost in the Trial of Swords. He bet his seal on the trial. The seal was his strength, his authority, his everything. Since Hyacinth had taken that away from him, Mendini's future was crystal clear. 1. Uni. It is a term for a woman to call an older woman or an older female sibling. A sun-shaped seal. It was a very small item, the size of a thumb, but its worth was beyond one's imaginations. It was because this little seal had about 100 permanent skills and numerous authorities within it. There were famous stories of a sneak called the Biggest Thief, and of the master artisans who were famous for replication. Yet both failed to get their hands on the seal. It was definitely impossible to replicate, and even within the Sun Guild, as there were only 15 seals, it goes without saying how rare these were. You really did win. Even if quite a lot of time that had passed since the trial had ended, Hyacinth was surprised. It seemed like she was still unable to differentiate between real and unreal with her slightly flushed face and eyes that hazily lost focus. It wasn't strange for her to be like that. To be honest, she gave up after hearing Muyang's opponent was Bastile. Even within the Sun Guild, he was someone that was within the top 20 people. Because he enjoyed slaughtering, he always killed the opponent he fought. However, he wasn't swayed easily. Mendini had him, who didn't act for most temptations, as his substitute. Other brothers and sisters would have probably helped out. She had given up thinking that this was the end. But goodness. Were you not confident? It's Bastile. He was a match for 100 people. He wiped out an entire dungeon on his own and was even famous for destroying M Guild. How could I possibly believe you could win? You lack self-confidence. There are a lot more cards in your hands than you think. Hyacinth would be surprised if she realized how many advantages she held. She just didn't know how to use them right now. Hyacinth's eyes shook. The small and pure girl was still in shock. I still can't believe it. Someone like you volunteered to stay beside me. Wasn't it you who looked for someone? To be exact, it was Hyacinth who looked for a person first. Since it was Hyacinth who spread around papers looking for a bodyguard all over the great city. However, since Hyacinth's position was so uncertain and most of the people in the great city knew of this, not many hastily came forward to be her bodyguard. If you looked at the rumors surrounding Hyacinth, it was basically this. The misfortunate girl who was sold off to the Arpeggio Guild. The victim of a power struggle. Cinderella. Seemed like she had these nicknames because she was bullied. Humans tend to find a scapegoat whenever a fight occurred. The youngest and the weakest, Hyacinth was chosen in this situation. Of course, others knew of this truth. That they would get hurt in this fight if they decided to register as her bodyguard. Most of the people who registered and said they would become her bodyguard did it for money or were just dead weight who had impure intentions towards Hyacinth. And by chance she was able to get Muyang. That's right, but I have little worldly experience, I just trained a lot until now. Muyang didn't tell the whole truth about himself and spiced it up a bit. It seemed like Hyacinth had no choice but to inevitably accept his answer. But then again, you can't just win against Bastile with a day or two worth of training. The investigation on Muyang had already ended. However, no matter how much they tried, they couldn't find any dirt on him. Muyang was like a person who suddenly spurted from thin air. But if that reason was because he was training in a secluded area, it was understandable to a certain degree. Currently, Hyacinth was going to believe Muyang as much as she could, even if he told her water was fire. Muyang spoke calmly. I thought there is no better place to gain worldly experience than this place. I can be confident about that part. The place beside me is more spectacular than other place. The place Muyang sat was first class. Worldly experience. You could experience a whole lot of things if you stayed within the Sun Guild. The tip of Muyang's lips slightly went up. It was interesting to see her give off such a determined impression when she set her mind to it, as when he first saw her, she just seemed like a weak girl. The short conversation ended and Hyacinth let out a deep sigh before she broached the main topic. By the way, what are we going to do about this? The sun-shaped seal. She had earned the seal after winning the Trial of Swords. The ownership of the seal had already been vested to Hyacinth. It's yours. It's a privilege you would naturally enjoy. If I have to, I can enter the B-rank treasure storage room whenever I want. Like the name implies, it's a room where B-rank equipment is piled up like a mountain. It should be okay to get at most 3 items. I don't need it. Although Hyacinth spoke in goodwill, if it was B-rank equipment he didn't need to greed over it. It was better to not receive anything now and continue to make her feel indebted. It was an action to try and take the load off her mind even a bit, but as Muyang wouldn't accept it, Hyacinth let out a sigh. Then would there be a reason for me to use it? The seal is power itself. Just by holding it, it will become your symbol. However, I will soon be a foreigner. Do you want to go to the Arpeggio Guild? Toei. I also don't want to be sold off to that sort of rude person. I think I'm too good for him. Hyacinth quickly declined. As if he already knew she would act like this, Muyang continued to talk. Then collect more seals. You can just possess enough power so that no one could refuse you even if you speak your mind. Just collect more seals. They were very cruel words to Hyacinth. In the end, it meant for her to have a bloody fight with her brothers and sisters. The seals. The 2 seals. Hyacinth's eyes expressed her nervousness. But Muyang, will we really be okay? It's not that I don't believe in you, but there are too many and too strong opponents. Of course. Muyang spoke with weight in his voice. Firm. Confident. He didn't use these expressions often, but it seemed like he could use it quite effectively right now. Then Muyang looked straight into Hyacinth's eyes and placed his hands on her shoulders and slowly spoke, articulating each word. There is no one who could win against me at this place. One rotten apple has spoiled the barrel. Inside a huge hall, the executives of the Sun Guild sat together and continued their conversation. We need to rout that fake prestige knight. A man spoke. The current topic of their conversation was, of course, regarding the man who defeated Bastille. However, they had no cause. The man Muyang wasn't part of the Sun Guild. He was just hired to be Hyacinth's personal bodyguard. With what cause? Everyone knew of this. They had failed to pressure Hyacinth to drive out Muyang. On the contrary, they realized the seriousness of this problem after seeing Hyacinth confidently countering their argument. Hyacinth is being controlled by that man. Then should we reopen the Trial of Swords? Using revenge against Mendini as the cause. It's too much for Mendini, who isn't worth even a penny. I don't really want to stand up for him. Mendini's value was already worthless. No one protected Mendini any further. He was already no different than half dead. To open the Trial of Swords for a man who isn't even worth using as the cause? There wouldn't be anything more embarrassing than that. Brothers, I will take care of it. Then from the corner, a man who quietly looked at the floor spoke. Ed Ranger, you will? Isn't it unnecessary for you brothers to get your hands dirty with this sort of work? When there was a big or small matter they couldn't handle on the surface, this man always came forward. In fact, everyone was secretly hoping he would come forward. Everyone's eyes were filled with trust. Ed Ranger then made an offer. I will place a request to the Forest of Death. The Forest of Death. Everyone murmured. Everyone was surprised. The Forest of Death. All the people gathered at this place knew the power of those 3 words. However, it couldn't be spoken of thoughtlessly. The Forest of Death was the Sun Guild and the other huge guild's weakness. The Forest of Death was a group created to monopolize their interests and to maintain them. Now they operated independently and accepted requests they like, but Ed Ranger had spoken about the Forest of Death. He is strong enough to even defeat Bastille. A decent assassin wouldn't work. Instead, it would only cause backlash. So we should resolve this situation quietly before then, right? He argued that it was better to send a strong person from the start. He certainly did have a point. Ed Ranger continued to talk. Brothers, you just need to quietly stay silent. No one replied. However, Ed Ranger faintly showed a smile. He also knew that silence was a yes. Assassins wearing black masks sat on top of the castle. Their numbers were roughly 20. Even if their feet touched the ground, they didn't even make a sound. They were even controlling the sound of their heartbeat and breathing. They didn't lack to be called top-notch. They came down by climbing the wall and entered the room Muyang was staying in. Swoosh. Thwack. The moment they looked around and entered the room, 2 assassins immediately fell to the floor. From the walls and from the darkness, snakes popped out and ripped the necks of the assassins. Welcome, guests. Before they were aware of, the man among the assassins spoke. The assassins were quickly taken back and moved away from the man, but he was one step faster. As the man grabbed an assassin with his hand, the assassin's whole body became soft and melted. The man was Ataraxia. Originally, he was an assassin who only took orders from Lawless Jean, the head of the Lawless clan, and was ordered to attack Muyang in the demon god's territory. However, he failed his assassination of Muyang, lost his life and became an undead. However, Ataraxia had skills even Muyang was surprised of. His entire body was trained purely for assassinations. He contained lethal poison in his body, handled numerous deadly snakes and chewed his enemies whole. To fight against Ataraxia, they would need more than 20 top assassins. They would need assassins who's ranked in the 10th range. Thud. Peng. A room in darkness. Ataraxia, who instantly killed 20 top assassins, only to again enter the room and kneel. I've cleared them all. My master. Since I've received a present, I need to return the favor, right? Ataraxia. And the man Muyang, who sat on the edge of the bed, spoke. Muyang watched the situation from the beginning to the end. Yes. Ed Ranger. Kill him. It will be possible if it's now. I accept your order. Swoosh. Ataraxia hid his form. There was no way for Muyang to not know of their communication. Muyang had already placed his strength in different places of the castle. Although they would never have expected it, it meant that it wasn't just Muyang who entered the castle. On top, Ed Ranger would be completely careless and believe that the assassination was a success right about now. If Muyang was after him, now was the right time. Since if he hears that the assassination failed, his defenses would strengthen. They used the Forest of Death. Muyang looked at the clothes the assassins were wearing. Grind. He unconsciously grinded his teeth. The Forest of Death. It seemed like the Forest of Death was strangely inextricably bound to Muyang. Ed Ranger had died. What is this? Ha! His head was cut off. Afterwards, it was placed on a pole located at the entrance. As it became morning, everyone was shocked and quickly moved to hide the situation. However, the death of Ed Ranger quickly spread throughout the great city. It was an event that was more shocking than Mendini's defeat. Also, it was a warning sent to them by Muyang. For them to stop playing tricks. Those who were associated couldn't help but keep their mouths shut. If they were to question Muyang, they would naturally be linked to the Forest of Death. There was nothing good if they were found to be working with the Forest of Death. On the other hand, those who weren't associated but were determined to find out about the truth of this incident. For a shameful event to occur within the Sun Guild. The Fire Dragon Knights and I will investigate this event with full authority. Among them was Lenin, the leader of the Fire Dragon Knights and one of the first knights of the Sun Guild. The man who was recognized as the proof of integrity within the Sun Guild. Of course, one of the people who possessed a Sun Seal. Lenin and his knights gained full authority and started to investigate this event. From Ed Ranger's death, Lenin seized an opportunity. The Fire Dragon Knights were the icon of the Sun Guild's strength and one of the biggest pillars of the Sun Guild. However honorable, generous, all of it was bullshit. Muyang was well aware of Lenin's ambition. A greedy tiger. Lenin was a tiger alright. But where Alexandro was a great tiger, Lenin was just one of the normal tigers. Since he tried his best catching even small prey and tried his best to not give them any slack. He was full of greed. He was praised for the qualities he showed on the outside, but his heart was completely black. Right about now he would wield supreme power and secure his position using Ed Ranger's death as the cause, due to the power vacuum left behind. To Lenin, Muyang's actions would be like a lucky break. If someone was playing it safe, of course, there would be others who would try to take advantage of the situation. How far will you go? While Lenin and the others were unaware, Muyang's eyes and ears were placed throughout the Sun Guild already. Although they had no idea, thanks to this, Muyang was able to roughly figure out Lenin's plan. However, even Muyang was unable to easily determine how much of Lenin's actions would influence him. Find out who was associated with Ed Ranger's death. Search every inch of this place. Lenin, what are you doing? How can you do this to me? Everyone was each other's enemy. There was no law that stated yesterday's ally would still be today's friend. Lenin didn't listen to a word the brother spoke. Someone from inside the guild killed one of us. I can't leave this incident to rest just because of personal feelings. What are you doing? Keep searching. A fish in water. As if he was waiting for something like this to happen, Lenin instantly dominated his surroundings. Since he was now gaining momentum, it wouldn't be easy for him to just stop either. And the direction of this momentum had reached even the Vice Guild Master. Abdullah, the second in command after Alexandro. However, Abdullah's hands and feet were already tied. It was because Alexandro's siblings had greater authority than him. Abdullah's close associates were instantly exiled or demoted when Alexandro disappeared. You could say the current Abdullah was no different than a mute orator. However, no matter how much his power was marginalized, his position still existed. The title of Vice Guild Master. Thanks to Abdullah, the Sun Guild still remained strong. And everyone should be aware of this. Since they had tied Abdullah's hands and feet, everyone could have won if Lenin didn't invade Abdullah. But Lenin went even a step further. Words that Lenin invaded Abdullah's library, house, etc. and started investigating with the Fire Dragon Knights had quickly spread. His measures that ignored even his position as Vice Guild Master. Clearly he showed the intent that he would kill anyone who interfered. Omnipotence. It didn't seem like there was anyone who could stop Lenin right now. It had already been 45 days since Alexandro disappeared. If Alexandro didn't return after 45 days from now, through a tournament, the next guild master would be decided. Lenin had instantly become the #1 candidate for the position of next guild master. Plang. A dagger had flown in. Muyang quickly moved his body and swung Anguish. Hyacinth froze from her surprise, but Muyang's expression was extremely serious. A full day wasn't enough to fully understand Lenin's actions, but a third party had shown up. Even more, their identities were more concerning. Ninjas. A group of 5 ninjas had entered the castle in broad daylight. How did they get in? Because ninjas used a lot of bizarre methods. Even Muyang was unable to easily detect them. But he was still able to discover them before they entered the room. And so he was able to block their attacks. Ninjas were those who came to the underworld from Japan and made an organization. Even the name of the organization itself was Ninja. And Muyang knew of the woman who was in charge of that place. Itsuki Yuka. The 5 men who stood in front of him were definitely ninjas by looking at their movements and the way they breathed. However, why on earth were ninjas after Hyacinth and springing a surprise attack on her? Ninja definitely had different tendencies than the Forest of Death. From the beginning, they didn't accept requests. It was an organization that moved only depending on their gains and losses. Perhaps, There was a possibility that Itsuki Yuka was involved with the inner parts of the Sun Guild. Swoosh. The 5 ninjas looked at each other and then started to back off. They had realized that Mu Young's agility was out of the ordinary. Wait. He couldn't just let them go like that. After saying one word, he followed the ninjas. Hyacinth slowly grasped her trembling heart. Although she had a vague notion that someone would make a surprise attack on her, she was scared out of her wits when it really happened. Haya, you need to get stronger. She urged herself. She repeated the name her mother called her by when Hyacinth was young, when her mother was still alive. That she couldn't shudder at just this. It was at that moment that a ninja appeared as if he popped out from the ground. He seemed as though he was harmonized with the castle stone. A ninja who learned the earth release technique. Sorry, but you need to die for our great cause. He was after the moment Mu Young was vacant. Hyacinth clenched her teeth tightly, raised her skirt, and took out a dagger tied to her leg. Although she wasn't much of a combative person, Hyacinth was still part of the Sun Guild. She had developed at least some level of martial arts skills. Even though she wasn't a rising star, it wasn't like she didn't know how to fight. I need to live. She swung her dagger. However, it didn't reach the ninja. Before she was aware of it, the ninja had retreated underground. It wasn't a cover. He really did harmonize with the ground and moved. Hyacinth quickly looked around. However, even though she anticipated it, she wasn't able to block his hand that popped out right underneath and grabbed her ankles. Let go. Although she quickly kicked her feet, his hand tried to drag Hyacinth down under the ground. The ground felt like it became a swamp. However, Hyacinth knew that she would die within the rocks if she was dragged in. Although she knew she couldn't escape him. Her strength was draining from her entire body. Mu Young. Although that was the name she first thought of, he wasn't at this place. Hyacinth tightly closed her eyes. However, she no longer felt her feet being sunk in. Then, as she opened her eyes, as she felt strange about it, a man stood in front of Hyacinth. Ah. Mu Young. It was Mu Young. However, Mu Young didn't reply. After piercing anguish through the ninja's head, he just stood there with an expressionless face. There was no consideration for Hyacinth at all. But she still liked it. Her own bodyguard who appears when she is in danger. She wasn't a girl if heart didn't tingle at this situation. While she tried to take control of her beating heart, Hyacinth asked, What about the other ninjas? Mu Young still kept silent. He seems as though he has a lot on his mind. Hyacinth didn't think hard about it. Perhaps he might have just returned because he was worried about her safety more than catching the ninjas. He was eternally moved by this. Thank you. But could you get me out? She had sunk into the floor to her knees. It was hard for her to get out on her own. However, Mu Young didn't move. He still seemed like he was deep in thought. She couldn't bother him. I understand. I will try to resolve this on my own. Hyacinth started to struggle with her feet. Mu Young continued to follow the ninjas. Soul's Tale. He showed his thoroughness as he sent his clone to remain with Hyacinth. Meanwhile, he quietly watched where the ninjas were heading to. The ninjas swiftly dispersed and tried to prevent Mu Young from following, but if they knew who Mu Young was in the past, they wouldn't have done something like this. They would have just taken their own lives on the spot or have died by Mu Young. However, they didn't know of Mu Young's past. So, Mu Young was easily able to figure out the final destination of the ninjas. Lennon. Surprisingly, Lennon was at their final destination. He was unsure when he conspired with the ninjas or if they were already together on this, but it didn't seem good. You failed. There was an interferer. We tried to bypass and kill Hyacinth, but as if he had already figured it out, he returned. We lost connection with our comrade. It was probably that bastard Mu Young. Lennon rubbed his chin and continued to talk. Did you find out about Alexandro's whereabouts? Not yet. Sheet. He wouldn't have run away after figuring out the trap we had already placed, right? Lennon, don't speak any further. I know. But who would enter this place? This room is protected by Lennon. What are you going to do with Abdulon? We can't kill that old weasel. We definitely bound him hand and foot, but he still has an odd sense of confidence. It seems like there is still a move he hasn't used yet. Find out about that as well. I understand. When this ends, I will not forget Yuka and your service. Ha! The ninjas bowed once before they quietly left the room. Muyang found out how the ninjas were able to enter the castle without anyone knowing. However, although he had kept an eye on Lennon until now, it was the first time he saw Lennon conspiring with the ninjas. Meant Lennon was that cautious. The ninjas, the command clan, Lennon, Abdulon, and Alexandro. It felt like everything was carefully put together like a puzzle. If Muyang's memories were correct, Alexandro didn't die. However, it was definitely strange for him to not appear like this. It seemed like the future had slightly changed. I need to strengthen my surveillance. He needed to widen his scope of surveillance. Muyang nodded his head and quickly left the area. Lennon was on a roll. Muyang thought of it as he watched Lennon. Currently, Lennon was taking full advantage of Muyang's work. Take it. Muyang gave Hyacinth the seal. He no longer had time to waste. In her room, Hyacinth took a deep sigh before widening her eyes. What is this seal? It's Ed Ranger's seal. I found it first before Lennon started to inspect his room. Hyacinth's jaw dropped. If someone finds out, we will be in big trouble. If we were to get caught now, yes. But Ed Ranger has handed over that seal to you. He handed over to me? There was a letter written in his own handwriting. From Muyang's side, he took out a letter. Hyacinth opened the letter right away and started to read what was written. As she read further along, her body shook more. This really is Ed Ranger Appa's handwriting. On top of that, his seal. But I don't understand. Why would Ed Ranger Appa hand over his seal to me? From the ninjas who suddenly appeared, everything couldn't be easily understood. There would be no better time to use the word chaos than now. Hyacinth looked at Muyang with slight doubt. Muyang just shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't tell her that he ordered Ataraxia to control Ed Ranger. He's helpful. Ataraxia had a lot of snakes he was able to control. From regular venom to hallucinating venom, even venom to control the mind, he was able to use countless different types of venom. It was a piece of cake to control Ed Ranger. However, he couldn't just tell Hyacinth the truth. There are some people who are awakened when they are about to die. Wouldn't it be similar to how the brothers and sisters you knew of are now different? After Alexandro disappeared, Hyacinth's brothers and sisters changed. Although it was more correct to say that their true characters came to light. After listening to this sort of comparison, Hyacinth lowered her head. However, if Lennon Appa knows that I have this seal, he wouldn't let go of this. The seal is power. With just 2 it might be lacking, but if you were to gather a few more seals, even he wouldn't be able to ignore you. It was the reason Lennon stormed in and used force. He was trying to not give them time to gather the seals. How? Continue to open the Trial of Swords. Trial of Swords? I have no cause. We just need to create a cause. Hyacinth looked at Muyang as questions went through her mind. But it was a good thing she didn't say that she won't do it. It seemed like Hyacinth had already made up her mind in her own way. On top of this, if they were to just stay still, Lennon would be unstoppable. Since Muyang now knew of his conspiracy with the ninja, it was now time for him to act. Things are working out interestingly. It was true chaos. No one could tell who their enemy was and who was their ally. During this time, there would be nothing weird if the tables were turned in just a day. The corner of Muyang's lip rose as he thought of his next move. I just need to make a cause. For Muyang, it wasn't that hard to do.